All right, baby, let's go. Welcome on into Love of the Star. And this might be a big time difference from what you're used to because there's no Bobby Belt. Oh, where are you, Bobby? I'm Zach Wolchuk alongside the Super Bowl winning scout, the man, the myth, the legend, the one and only Bryan Broaddus, and our fellow G-Bag Nation co-host, the great Eric Chiafalo. And this is going to be your new setup for Love of the Star moving forward. We're going to be switching it around today. We got the whole squad together. Of course, we got Peyton Russell, who's producing for you as always. But we're going to be separating this into twos. So sometimes it'll be myself, Zach Wolchuk, alongside Bryan. Sometimes it'll be me and Eric. It'll be Eric and Bryan. But Bobby was running his mouth a little bit too much. We found out that he was stealing our content and repurposing it as his own on Love of the Star. And he really, really upset people all across the country with his bad takes. So he has been fired, guys, and we have replaced him.
Yeah. Hey, that's a bold statement right off the jump. But again, hey, welcome to you both. Looking forward to working with you as I do, every day. And in this podcast, The Love of the Star, we've got a lot of great followers, a lot of listeners. Super excited to have you guys on board. In all seriousness, thanks to Bobby for what he did to help this podcast grow. But like I said, super excited to have you both on and us able to kind of mix some shows up and be really consistent with our content.
It's going to be a great time. I'm fired up. And to be fair to Bobby, he didn't get fired. I heard it was kind of like a McCarthy situation. They just lowballed him so hard. He had too much self-respect and he just sort of walked away from it all. So at least tip of the cap to Bob.
Yeah, just a parting of ways there. We do love Bobby. And heck, Bobby might still pop on as he gets with us from time to time in the future because he is absolutely a wealth of knowledge. But we're excited to be with you. And Eric, that's a great segue into the coaching search. That is the hot topic now across Cowboys Nation. Who is going to be the next head coach of your Dallas Cowboys? We found out today, boys, one name is not going to be an option anymore. It's Pete Carroll, who we heard whispers yesterday. As of now, when we're recording, he is now the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. He's not going to be coming to Dallas.
Yeah, the way this thing is all kind of played out, yesterday while we were doing our show on 105.3 The Fan, we started to hear some whispers about Pete Carroll. I'd heard Pete Carroll's name the day before as a guy that potentially might get an interview. And, maybe Pete Carroll was, trying to kind of get involved, maybe make the Raiders step up their game and get him done like they did today. And so, there were a lot of things going on. I was hearing that Jerry Jr. and then Stephen Jones were pushing very, very hard for Schottenheimer. And they're pushing very hard for Schottenheimer because they were going through Dak Prescott. And Dak Prescott's was like, give it a decision, Kellen Moore or Shoddy. And it appears in talking to some folks that Dak Prescott leaned towards Brian Schottenheimer. So here the Joneses go on this. Jerry Jones has an opportunity. He calls Pete Carroll asking about Schottenheimer. Pete Carroll then says, hey, wait a minute, I'm looking for a gig. You interested? And all of a sudden Jerry's like, well, wait a minute. Oh, maybe I am interested. So there were some moments there where it was very reminiscent of what we saw on a War Room cam in when the Zach Martin and the Johnny Manziel went down. They had an idea of the direction they wanted to go, and when their guy went away, then all of a sudden they had to pivot to Zach Martin, which and Jerry had to be reminded. Hey, Zach Martin, Dad, Zach Martin. He's the reason we posted him. We got him stacked this way for that reason. And so, there was Jerry, asking questions about, well, what about Pete Carroll? Jerry obviously had a conversation with Pete Carroll about Bryan, and, Pete's interested, looking for a gig. So it just kind of held things up a little bit for all indications on Friday today that Brian Schottenheimer will be named the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. I would be surprised if it doesn't happen. But stranger things, it's the Dallas Cowboys. Maybe all of a sudden, we saw what happened in Jacksonville with Liam Cohen. Once they got rid of that general manager, boom, he was back in the mix. Does Deion Sanders with the Shrine Bowl and his two sons coming in for this, all of a sudden does Deion say, wait a minute, throw my name back in this thing? So you never know until the ink is dried with the Dallas Cowboys, but the indications as of this morning as we tape this at 11:40 Central Time, it is indicated. It looks like it is going to be Brian Schottenheimer's. But again, hang on. We're on a roller coaster ride still.
Yeah, everything's day to day. We know that. And the more I considered Pete Carroll, the more I looked back at the previous relationship with Brian Schottenheimer. I mean, part of the reason Pete Carroll didn't want Schottenheimer to be there was because Pete Carroll is even more conservative than Brian Schottenheimer wanted to be. Pete Carroll wants to run the ball at every turn. No one loves a punt more than Pete Carroll. Loves settling for 3, no problem. Anti going for it on 4th down. And so, like, that's not a guy that you want in a league right now when you're seeing Dan Quinn, Dan Campbell, all these teams, the top 4 teams remaining in the postseason right now, all have 70+% in 4th down conversion rate this year. Like, there's a new way of doing things that Pete Carroll, I don't think, was going to be bringing to the table. The Schottenheimer thing doesn't really inspire me or move me in any way either. It's certainly a disappointing hire, but at least you have somewhat of the unknown of, like, we've never seen him do this before. So perhaps, and maybe there was a secret playbook he had this whole time and McCarthy just ignored it, and he's got some awesome, innovative offense to unveil. But that is certainly a very, very slight chance.
Yeah, that's definitely stuff that we had heard, right? Is, there might have been some stuff after games where Mike McCarthy's like, you know what, maybe there is something to what Kyle Shanahan and that 49ers offense is doing. And Shoddy's looking around like, are you serious? We've been talking about this now for a couple of years. So that is the reason to kind of find optimism as a Cowboy fan. I know my rant's kind of gone viral. I was not happy initially when we heard about the Brian Schottenheimer stuff, and I'm still very pessimistic on it. I do think that it's a little bit strange that you are now the only team out of 32 over the course of now really 15 years that is now saying, okay, this is our guy that we want to hire. But you hear
Zach, I think we lost you there on the audio. So you might have hit a button or something like that. I know you were going on there, but Eric, to the point he was making about the situation with Schottenheimer, and I'll say this though, with in defense, I went back and I looked, and I'm not comparing Brian Schottenheimer to Dan Campbell, but I went back and looked at the Detroit Free Press and some of the comments that were made about when Dan Campbell was hired, and it was utter disdain. Not only from the Free Press, it was from the disdain from Colin Cowherd, worst hire in the league, worst hire of the cycle. All these things were like going in that way. So I just am, I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt right now. This is where, and I'll say this, Eric, you've been really consistent on our shows on 105.3 The Fan about Dak Prescott, and not no hatred on your part. You were just willing to move on. But if you're a fan of Dak Prescott, you have to look at this as they're trying to help him with a Brian Schottenheimer hire. Now, they could have helped him with a Ben Johnson hire or a Liam Cohen hire, one of those kinds of hires. But they went to him and asked, hey, who do you like? Who do you want? And so, if you like Dak, they're trying to help him. If you're a guy or a gal that's like, listen, the quarterback is not the answer here, well, then you have a right to probably say, okay, well, let's see the coach and what happens here. So, it's you could be mad if you're a fan of Dak, you could be mad at the hire, but kind of focus on the fact that they did this hire to try and help your guy.
Yeah, and I get that they're probably trying to come from a good place with that. I just think I just think it's a misguided approach. I think
sure. Yeah.
I think they're trying to make Dak comfortable. They're asking Dak his thoughts, and I don't know how many people would really think that Dak has earned the right to be making these sort of decisions. If Pat Mahomes wants to do that, okay. That's not what we're dealing with right now. And so this Brian Schottenheimer offense, and he's apparently reportedly hell-bent on calling the plays as well. And so what about his offense has ever inspired you that he's really helping his quarterback? Like, I know he hasn't had great. He had the 1 year, of Russell Wilson, but even it was the worst QBR that we've seen from Russell Wilson to that point in his career. He was 27. Sure. And he had a lot of Mark Sanchez and Sam Bradford, Kellen Clemens. I get that. But he's never had a guy where he was the where he was the OC, he was the guy calling plays. We've never seen him have a quarterback with a QBR better than 15. So how is that really helping Dak Prescott?
Zach, anything? I think we've lost you still. Yeah. Don't hear you. Yeah, we don't hear you as well. Yeah. But yeah. So the situation, I think that, like I said, it's one of those opportunities where all of a sudden, you're looking at it as a, the quarterback. The quarterback has always had some influence. Jerry Jones leans on the quarterback, leans on a Tony Romo, leans on a Troy Aikman. How about some of the draft picks that Troy Aikman, the LaFleur, the tight end, the quarterbacks have had a say in what goes on with this organization. So, I want to believe that Jerry Jones wanted. I think Jerry Jones actually wanted Deion Sanders to be the coach here. I really, really do, and I think he got talked out of it. And I think that's where all of a sudden the groundswell within the organization went against Jerry to make this hire. But the quarterback has a lot to say in what happens, Zach.
I usually would side with, hey, I want the quarterback, especially one that you've now paid to be your guy, to have say. He should, right? He should have some say in who the play caller is and what's going on with the offense. Now, though, I don't know so much. I think that there has been a lot of continuity, and there has been a lot that they've done a good job of. When you have 9 years of Jason Garrett, then you have Kellen Moore stay under Mike McCarthy to keep that continuity for Dak. And then eventually you have Mike McCarthy take over the play calling when Kellen leaves, because maybe there was some friction there. But you had Mike for 5 years. The one thing for Dak, the one defense, and Eric, I think you and I both said this, is you haven't seen him with a difference-making offensive play caller. But if he's going to continue to vouch for the same guys and relatively the same system, I can no longer defend you there. If that's the offense that you want to run, if that's what you're comfortable with, then that's on you. And Dak has had tremendous success. There's no denying the numbers and the stats under Kellen Moore a year ago when you're runner-up for MVP. The problem is when you're playing against better defenses, and specifically in the postseason, that success has not translated. So for me, keeping the status quo, I don't think is really the right play. But I do understand when you hear guys like Troy Aikman talk about how difficult it is to a new system. I just would have faith in Dak. You're a 10-year veteran. I think Dak is very good pre-snap when it comes to diagnosing, processing, making reads. I think he's smart enough to be able to learn a new verbiage and a new offense. I think the time is now for this. At this stage in his career, I think we've seen you in this type of offense. Maybe Shoddy does have your point, some new wrinkles to add, but I'm kind of not into this continuity comfort stuff anymore. I think there's too much comfort. I love the idea of Deion Sanders to come in and change some stuff up.
Me too. Yeah, at least it would be high-level entertainment and a guy that you could see Jerry giving the keys to more so than he would anybody else. Not that he would ever really give the keys fully to anybody, and that's part of the problem. But he like Deion commands that type of respect. But I think the problem here overall is you've whittled it down based on the desires from your front office and from Jerry and Steven and company. Like they have all these different parameters, and Mike McCarthy wants to walk away from them. Like they don't want to pay you very much. They probably don't want to give you the longest deal. Jerry's talking about doing incentive-laden deals, and you might have the shadow of Jason Witten lurking over you. They might want to handpick like majority of your staff. So you don't really have a chance at a Ben Johnson or any super hot candidate who has options. Like you've had to have whittled it down to a guy like Schottenheimer. Even Kellen Moore, like his interview didn't last very long. I'm sure he didn't really like what he heard. And it's not like he's got a crazy amount.
He had questions. He had questions about whether he really wanted to be here. There were some questions. I was hearing from some people that does Kellen Moore really, really want to be the coach here? So, yeah, I'm totally with you on that, Eric.
Bryan, one other thing I wanted to talk about with this coaching search. What have you heard when it comes to another name that was brought up with Rich Bisaccia as maybe a dark horse candidate?
Yeah. Rich is listen, Rich and I don't get along at all. So, but I'm telling you what he was not happy with the way I handled Jason Garrett, and rightfully so. I mean, I made it personal with Jason Garrett, so I understand why Rich Bisaccia not happy with me at all. What I do know about the Rich Bisaccia situation, though, is Rich is one of those guys that's very outspoken, you know, and when he wants to get out of something, he raises his voice. Okay. And so now, you know, he could be very much well, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Why am I doing this? He could be one of those guys, you know? So when things were kind of going south with Jason Garrett, Rich tends to raise his voice. And there's some people within the organization that just weren't very, very pleased with that. And so I got the vibe that Rich was kind of in that mode of, yeah, I'd love to come back. I want to be your guy, hat in hand. But there's some people that still have some feelings about how that departure happened. So that's why Rich Bisaccia was not a candidate. Ed Werder quickly dismissed that. I know Hoyt from All City put it out there. I even put Rich's name out there. Yeah. I even put Rich's name. Yeah. And when I put that out there, it was thinking like, well, they like Rich. Well, got circled back a little bit, circled back to me, and kind of heard those things. So that's where we are right now.
Well, we'll be monitoring this coaching search. Maybe this thing ends up being completed by the time we reconvene and have our next episode of Love of the Star. But what's going to happen with Shotty's coaching staff? That's another wrinkle to this. I think we do know Mike Zimmer would not be part of that, correct?
Yeah, I did. I talked to Mike Zimmer myself, and Mike is disappointed that he never even got a shot at this job. You know, and Mike did fine job. It didn't turn into wins and losses here, but look what Mike and his defensive staff did. You look at the defense. You look at Oso Digizua played better. Mozzie Smith played better. Look what Golston was able to do. Look what Jordan Lewis was able to do. He went through all those cornerbacks over there and kind of held you in games. Mike Zimmer did a fine job. Mike has he will have worked with 6 of the 10 coaches in the history of the Dallas Cowboys, and it's been passed over every single time. Mike Zimmer, unless something changes, as of yesterday, Mike Zimmer told me he is not interested in being a part of a Bryan Schottenheimer-led Cowboys staff.
You are listening to the Love of the Star podcast. Love of the Star is an Odyssey podcast. You can find it on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. Zach Wolchuk alongside Brian Broaddus, Eric Chiafalo. Let's talk about something I think we all love, and that is the NFL draft. And that is also really the only way that the Dallas Cowboys seem to team build, since they're not players in free agency. Maybe you get creative with a trade, but that's a little bit far few in between there. But gentlemen, before we dive in, Brian, because I know you and I have actually been able to look at some of these prospects being part of the draft show on DallasCowboys.com. We've got the Shrine Bowl, we've got the Senior Bowl. But Eric, for you, when you're looking at the draft, the upcoming season for the Cowboys, I think the list of needs is extremely long. You could pretty much pick any position. But from your understanding of the draft, from what you've seen so far for 2025, if you could have your ideal first 3 rounds, what kind of position groups are you looking to try and hit here?
Ooh, that's a great question. I mean, I want to go as premium of a position as possible in round 1. You're picking at 12. I'm totally open to a trade down scenario because this team cannot have enough draft picks with the way they like to build their team. So I'm totally open to that. I know this is a draft that doesn't have a ton of first round grades. So if you can get a team that wants to jump up there, I'd be totally down for it. Otherwise, I want to get a premium position. If that's a trench player on either side of the ball, I'm here for it. I think there might be an edge rusher or two that could be there. That would be interesting to me. I love the Texas kid Barron in the defensive backfield, versatile piece with the Trayvon Diggs news about him going to be missing probably into the start of the season. You absolutely need Bland's on the final year of his deal. Who knows what happens with Jordan Lewis in free agency? You didn't love what you saw from Kalen Carson in year 1 last year, so you could easily make the choice of going for a guy like that. So I want to go premium edge rusher, offensive line, or DB. Even the wide receivers are interesting. I mean, I'd be open to that. I really would be. This is clearly a draft where the running back can stretch on you. You got guys in the second round that are going to be solid players. Third round, this is apparently the best running back draft we've seen in a long time. So I would be all about trying to, starting in round 2, 3, 4, get you a guy that you like, and rock and roll that way. But you can't go wrong building in the trenches. So after that, man, I'm totally about getting some guys that can win on the line of scrimmage for you.
Well, we also just had another running back declared today. Quinshon Judkins of Ohio State did go ahead and enter into the draft. So that's another candidate. I know that we've discussed on the draft show, Bryan, TreVeyon Henderson, his teammate, or Quinshon Judkins. I lean Henderson because of the speed factor there. I think that's something you've lacked with the Cowboys backfield. I think Judkins, better version of really what you've had with Rico Dowdle. I think he does have a little bit more speed element, but a very good in-between the tackles runner, maybe a better receiver out of the backfield. But the one thing that I think he's going to have to improve on, pass protection. He's certainly a willing pass blocker, but he's more of that guy that I'm going to sacrifice my body, throw it in there. TreVeyon Henderson's got a little bit more form when it comes to taking on some blitzers and some edge rushers there. I think Henderson's second round, Judkins third round for me.
Totally agree with you on that. And I think there's, to answer your question about position groups, you could go several different ways. O-line, running back, linebacker, wide receiver, running back, defensive tackle, wide receiver, running back, linebacker, offensive line, wide receiver, defensive tackle. You could just, the combinations that you could throw at this thing are really endless because of all the needs. This is not going to be easy for the scouting staff. They're probably in a possibility or looking ahead of all the free agents they have. I mentioned about Oso Digizua. I mentioned about Golston. I mentioned about Lewis. I mentioned there's probably a guy or two they'll sign. We'll see how that all plays. They love to sign their own guys. But it's going to be another, and I'm using the word purge, but it's really not a purge. They're not getting rid. These guys are moving on from their own. And, we saw a wave last year, and we kind of said, oh, it's okay. They'll figure it all out. They'll be fine. They really weren't fine. And here we go. Here comes another wave. I don't think they have enough picks, and I don't think they have enough cap to be able to fill all the holes that they're going to have. They're going to get in this draft, and all of a sudden it's going to be, they're probably not going to have enough picks. They're probably going to wish there were 12 rounds in this draft instead of just 7. So this will be a lot of pressure on Will McClay and these scouts, and then the pro scouts to be able to bottom fish for some guys that they're going to need, like they did with Carl Lawson and some of the others.
Well, it's going to be a tremendous opportunity because we've got the East-West Shrine Bowl right in the backyard here that's going to be played at AT&T Stadium. Practices will be at Eric and I's alma mater at the University of North Texas, Datku Stadium. And as you mentioned, Bryan, Deion Sanders should be here. Both of his sons, Shador and Shiloh Sanders, will be participating in that. You also have the Senior Bowl going on in Mobile, Alabama, which is a tremendous event. I mean, Bryan, having lived this and in all your years of scouting and having run a draft with the Philadelphia Eagles, what are the biggest opportunities here for teams and for the players to really help themselves as we kick off the draft season?
No, you're absolutely right. And any time that you get now, area scouts that have gone to the schools have seen a lot of these guys practice. There's some general managers, some scouts that the West Coast scout hasn't seen players from the East Coast, and the East Coast scout hadn't seen the players from the West Coast. So now the names, you start to kind of get an idea. You get to see these players practice live. You get to see body types. You get to go up and shake their hand. You get to go up and ask them questions. This is where these games, and the Senior Bowl always talks about the draft starts here. And it really, with what they've done at the East-West has been nice. The Senior Bowl, both these bowl games have been around forever. The Blue-Gray used to be a part of this. But any time that you can evaluate and get your scouting department all on the same page of like, oh, I see now what my guy in the Southeast saw with this guy. Oh, wait a minute. I see what my West Coast guy saw in this guy. So it's just a good way of getting everybody that first look of these players live. And, tape is one thing. Tape is great. Tape is my friend. But to be able to watch a live practice and kind of go up and talk to these kids, I think is invaluable.
I'm interested to see how that quarterback Kyle McCord looks like in a draft where these quarterbacks are not like it's not the best quarterback class. I wonder if there's going to be somebody that ends up sort of climbing throughout the process. And this could certainly go a long way for him from that standpoint. The other guy that I think is interesting, and he's obviously not in the Shrine Bowl, but like Jackson Dart is another quarterback.
Jackson Dart, I'm glad you brought him up. I think that Jackson Dart is going to be the one guy that all of a sudden we're really not talking about him as a first-round guy, and people are going to dive in on him, Eric, and they're going to see a guy, especially when you're watching, in the East-West game, we have Trey Harris that's playing from Ole Miss, a wide receiver, and you could see plenty of times where Trey Harris is making plays across the field, down the field, and Jackson Dart's the one throwing him the football.
I know one game that has gotten a lot of hype for Jackson Dart is 2023 versus LSU. And he went toe-to-toe with Jaden Daniels in that game. So
absolutely.
If you're looking for one of these under-the-radar quarterbacks that could end up building themselves up into the first-round conversation, I think Dart is one to watch. Before we get into the Shrine Bowl, I do think at the Senior Bowl you do have, from a Cowboys lens, some running backs that are going to be fun to look at. You've got Devin Neal from Kansas, Ollie Gordon from Oklahoma State's going to be part of that. Ollie Gordon was a guy, Euless Trinity Zone in the DFW area 2 years ago, best running back in college football. Then you had an offensive coordinator, if you talk with people in Stillwater this year, was not very kind to that offense, might be a reason why they regressed. And the offensive line was very, very poor because Ollie Gordon looked like a shell of himself this past year. How does he do then at the Senior Bowl? Donovan Edwards, a running back from Michigan. This time last year, Donovan Edwards was a darling. He just had an absolute sensational national championship game, was big for Michigan. And then this year, he's part of the College Football 25 video game. He's on the cover. Not much. Kind of a quiet season from Donovan Edwards. Cam Scatabo, he's going to be there as well, along with Damian Martinez from Miami. And R.J. Harvey, a guy that I know we like a lot, Bryan.
Yeah.
Central Florida. Who stands out to you? That's a hell of a running back class that you've got at the Senior Bowl. We didn't even talk about the Shrine Bowl and the running backs that are going to be there, like Taj Brooks from Texas Tech, who I think could be the best pass protecting back in the class.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you mentioned Harvey, and this is a really a good group. These guys are all very tightly packed in these rounds, and you could stretch this thing pretty deep. And with Harvey, I was super, super impressed. This kid had 32 carries this season of 15 yards per carry. That's the second most in the country. When you talk about explosive plays, 38 touchdowns the last 2 seasons. He could make small runs into big runs. He has a good job of finishing runs. He'll make tacklers miss in space. It's amazing how often he does this. And it's funny because he plays in an offense at Central Florida that's now, with it's their head coach moving on to Florida State to run the offense now. But here is this, though they bring him the ball and it's like this slow developing offense. And then they hand it to him and he's almost like he's standing still. And then he's able to explode. He finds the holes, very patient, can get inside, can get outside. He's 5'9", he's 208. There's going to be some backs in this draft. I'll be interested to see what Scatabo, what he measures in. My guys are telling me he's a 5'9" guy as well. So yeah, there's a great group of backs. They all have different skill sets, but man, when you watch them, they're all kind of tightly like when we start talking about the draft, on DallasCowboys.com or 105.3 when we're doing our work, there'll be a lot of times that somebody will go, well, who's your best player on the board? It could very well be one of these running backs when we get to that point.
Well, that's big. I'm curious when you guys think like the cutoff point is in terms of like you need to draft if the Cowboys want to get like an explosive guy that they can sort of lean on. Where is it? The 4th round?
Well, right now, and Zach, real quick. There's some guys I still have to do, like Edwards and some guys like that. I'm right now in the 4th round, and there's a couple there's a couple of backs that I would absolutely look at there. Hunter from Auburn is one that, that I think like, man, this guy is not moving fast, but he is fast, the way he plays and stuff. So right now, I've got this thing where I'm comfortable taking a guy in the fourth round if I have to get there. And, that's with a lot of names involved. That's, as I look at it right now, that's 9, 10, that's 11 names so far and still some guys to do.
Yeah, I think for the Cowboys, you've got to get one by the third round, in my opinion. That's because they don't have a fourth-round pick. And we saw last year how that hurt them with the running backs that went off the board right after where they could have picked with that Trey Lance trade. Guys like Isaac Guerrero, Bucky Irving come to mind. And there's several others. But and you might be able to use your comp picks. Maybe you can move back into the fourth if you wanted to. But I think at the end of day two, I don't want to risk it. I think you're probably going to be – your starting running back's probably going to be that rookie that you select because we don't know if Rico Dowdle is going to be able to come back. So I think you need to end the third round by probably having taken your starting running back, Eric.
Good. No, that's good to know. I was because I would love to stretch it out as much as you can, but you make a great point about not having that fourth round pick. All of a sudden, you're in no man's land if you don't get a guy. Like you said, maybe you could package a bunch of those fifth round picks that you got and move up and go get somebody perhaps. But I know the Cowboys need somebody with some juice, some explosion. Even if you keep Rico, you're looking for a guy that can be sort of more of a hitter a little bit.
I think the guys you're looking at potentially in the third round as we work through this on the draft show and on 105.3 The Fan is that you will see that the guys on third round on back probably need to be paired with a guy. But, there's some guys like Johnson from Iowa, of course, our guy
Hampton,
Genty from Boise. Hampton, those guys. Those could be bell cow guys. I think some others are probably going to need a little help.
Couple of other names to watch at the Shrine Bowl for me. I think some of these corners are going to be intriguing. I really enjoyed watching Kobe Bryan, and that's Kobe, Cobee, from Kansas. This is a scrappy guy. Whenever I'm watching corners, I kind of want to see that dog, that competitiveness, right? Because you're going to be thrown out there on an island. And Kobe Bryant's guy at Kansas, I love the way he attacks the football. He's physical. And Jabbar Muhammad at Oregon would be another name to watch for me, a guy who transferred from Washington, but good length. I like the size. These are guys that have an opportunity to help themselves. And then the medical on Siobhan Rebel Jr. from East Carolina.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is a thing to watch because if he checks off, that's a dude who should be in play for you at 12 overall, Brian.
No, you're absolutely right about that. And I'll throw one more guy in there. Kenneth Grant, the defensive tackle from Michigan, is a guy I've keeping my eye on. There's going to be a run of let me put it this way. I've got second round tackles graded as second round. The problem is if you have 15 first round grades, every one of those second round grades become a possibility at 16, 17, 18, 19 down the line. But Kenneth Grant, in my book, could very well have been a first round type of a player, 6'3", 339 from Michigan. Again, don't grade the helmet, grade the player. They've got a couple of guys that are really, really, really good. Mason Graham as well with the Michigan with the defensive tackle. So keep an eye on him at the East-West Shrine game from what I've seen of the rosters.
Absolutely. I mean, the Shrine Bowl is going to be fantastic. We'll be able to talk about that all next week as well. And then at the Senior Bowl, just a wealth of what Jim Nagy's doing over there. I mean,
nice job.
It's incredible. Brian, the one other thing that I want to talk about before we wrap regarding the bowl games and the Cowboys not having – is that a negative to be going into this, not having your head coach and your staff in order as you go to the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl?
No, I think they'll be fine. They're very familiar. If it's, in fact, Shoddy has got some ideas. They've worked with Schottenheimer before. This is not like they're coming in cold. Now, they might have some positions. We'll see what coaches. I know Bobby Belt on our station this morning was talking about the possibility of some coaches staying over. Lunda Wells, who was a tight ends coach, particularly could be the offensive line coach. There's going to be, with Mike Zimmer possibly being gone, we'll see if Jeff Zugina, Al Harris, and others get to stay. I think Jeff Zugina did a hell of a job, with that defensive line last football season. So, but they have an idea. It's not going to be a total overhaul like what you're probably going to have in Tampa and an overhaul, what you're going to have, we'll see not in Tampa, in Jacksonville or with the Jets and places like that.
Any final thoughts before we wrap, Eric?
Well, I just wonder, does that mean if Wells gets the O-line gig, would that be Solari out, or is Solari?
Yeah, that's Solari out. So we'll see. I mean, Mike Solari and Schottenheimer have worked together a long time. This might be one of these things, but let's see what the front office says. Let's see if the front office was totally, they have to be looking at, okay, what was wrong with Guyton? We're usually a plug and play group over here. What's going on with that? Did we get better here? So yeah, the front office might tell Bryan Schottenheimer that they need to make a change there.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden, yeah, exactly. Yes. All of a sudden, yes. Jason Witten now is your tight ends coach. Perhaps.
Perhaps, maybe. All right, boys, this has been a blast. I look forward to this. This is going to be fun. That is Bryan Broaddus, the Super Bowl winning scout. We got Eric Chiafalo, who, of course, is with us on 105.3 The Fan and the G-Bag Nation. I am Zach Wolchuk, also of 105.3 The Fan, G-Bag Nation, Draft Show. For now, fingers crossed. Hopefully I don't get booted off of that thing after that rant's gone viral. But we'll be here, Love of the Star. We got you covered moving forward. We love you guys, and make sure you're always checking out the Love of the Star podcast. It is an Odyssey podcast. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. Hugs and hand pounds, everybody. Until next episode.